Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for our keynote speaker of this morning, Transformation of the Financial Landscape Through Alternative Investments, Dr. the Honorable Nigel Clarke.
With an introduction like that, I should just not bother speak because it's only downhill from there. Chairman of Sygnus, Mr. Milton Brady, Managing Director, President and CEO, Mr. Beresford Gray, members of the Sygnus family here in Jamaica and overseas, members of the media, fellow members of the financial community in Jamaica, good morning. Well, you have a whole heap of energy for Terry, but when it comes to me, it does lackluster. I don't understand that. Not because I'm not shocking red. I tried to tie. Good morning. Morning. I must say, this is some rock star kind of stage. But I want us to reflect this morning on the fact that we're here in what represents a period of significant turmoil in capital markets for emerging market economies. And we're here for the first ever Sygnus Day discussing alternative investments. I want you to reflect on that for a moment. There's hardly anywhere in the emerging markets today that this would be a priority. All you have to do is, and here I'm talking to the financial community and to those online, so forgive the references, they may not be general. You just have to open your Bloomberg screen and you look what is happening to the spread over treasuries for sovereign bond yields across emerging markets. Now, clearly, as interest rates go up, bond yields will go up and prices across the board will come down. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the relative adjustment and the fact that bond yields for emerging markets in Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa, and Asia have skyrocketed over treasuries, representing the risk that is perceived. And here I'm not talking about countries that are basket cases. I'm not talking about that. Yes, we have a few examples that have made international news and that everyone is aware of. I'm talking about countries that have, in the popular parlance, had, a good time. And spread over treasuries are 10 points, 5 points, 7 points, and it's expansion that I'm speaking about. And for Jamaica, the spread over treasuries, as compared with investment-grade countries, Jamaica is trading inside of those spreads. Is anybody here aware of that? I'm sure you all are. So I just wanted to reflect on that for a moment. Coming out of what has been the greatest economic shock that we have experienced in our history, that is a reality which allows us the opportunity to be having these kinds of conversations. Now, it would be a mistake for us to believe that those are automatic achievements, that those are things that can just happen, because I want to put it to you that though it remains a work in progress and a work that has a long way to go, it is as a result of deliberate policy action and deliberate choices why that is the reality that we have today. Don't forget that when this pandemic started, the very first case happened on the day of my budget speech in March 2020. I'll never forget, because we were soaring. And by June 2020, Jamaica had a 100-page document on our economic recovery strategy from the COVID-19 pandemic. June of 2020. There is no other country in this region that had such a comprehensive and thoughtful and inclusive approach to how we were going to handle this pandemic economically than Jamaica. And this was not a document that, well, let me put it in a positive. This came out of an extensive and collaborative process that involved the private sector, involved the trade unions, members of academia. We had a huge task force that would meet on a weekly basis. And unusually, we had several ministers who were involved in that task force meeting as well. And it was broken down into sub-task forces. And a report was produced in June of 2020. And that report said very clearly how we were going to handle this pandemic from an economic point of view. We set out very clearly 7 principles that we would abide by, that would form the foundation of the discipline that we would bring to what we knew was going to be a significant economic shock. And it's interesting to go back and look at that today. We also were able to generate consensus around the big policy items that we would pursue. And as I said, the group was a multifaceted group involving persons from very different sectors in the economy. And we forged consensus, for example, that, I don't want to go into all the details, but that we would follow through on the independence of the central bank. That was a commitment prior to the pandemic. The pandemic provided every excuse not to do it. But in December 2020, when people were at home, when we were socially distanced, when you couldn't have a party, you couldn't assemble like this, when Parliament met virtually for committees, we followed through in what will someday be seen as one of the most consequential single legislative actions to remove the central bank from the sphere of political involvement. And the list of reforms that we pursued and the fiscal decisions that we made, the principles were embedded in that document that we produced in June of 2020. As I have been at pains to point out, we can create for ourselves the future that we want. It may not come overnight, but it is unmistakably possible. All that it requires is focus, discipline, planning ahead. Of course, the social consensus is critically important, maintaining that and bringing people along. So as you go throughout today, I would like you, again, to be positive, to be cognizant of the external environment in which this conversation is taking place, and to be aware that the fact that we're here discussing this is not something that we should take for granted. It is something that we all have to work on actively on a day-to-day basis, because these things can slip ever so easily. And that has been the lesson of Jamaica's history. We often have conversations when we talk about the average level of Jamaica's growth, which is a worthwhile topic of conversation because it has been very low. But focusing on the mean masks a bigger problem. And the bigger problem that it masks is that there has been great volatility around that mean. Right? You can have average of 1% in many ways. It could just be 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Or it could be 5 minus 4, 5 minus 4, 5 minus 4, 5 minus 4. Right? And the way in which our average has occurred is that it has occurred because we have had massive volatility. It's not that we haven't had periods of growth, but the periods of decline have been too long. And it has taken us too long to recover. And as if you will hear me say this again, because it needs to be a part of our consciousness. It was detailed in that report that came out in June 2020, that when the economy declined in 1976 from the upheavals in that decade, it took 14 years to get back to the pre-1976 level of economic output. I want you to just think about that. The economy declined in 76, 77, 76, 77, 79. All right, so it went down. And it took 14 years from 1975 to get back to the pre-76, which was 75, level of economic output in real terms. When the economy declined due to the global financial crisis in 2008, declined in 08, 09, 10, it took until 2019 to get back to the pre-global financial crisis level of economic output. 11 years. And that is the essence of our economic history, where we get a shock. The shock leads to second order and third order crises. Debt crisis, balance of payment crisis, which compounds the complexity of the resolution and the response and the recovery. And so it takes a generational time frame to recover. So when we set out in June 2022, we recognized that fact up front. We called it out. We put the data out there and we said, this time, we're not going to take 14 years. We're not going to take 11 years. And the way that we are assured that that will not be the case is to make sure that the shock does not deliver second and third order consequences. And that Jamaica uses the crisis as a means of differentiating ourselves from the rest of the emerging market space. And that is exactly what we did. Which other country in the middle of a crisis is passing legislation to institutionalize an independent fiscal commission? Which other country in the midst of the crisis is making its central bank independent and being very clear about the direction of fiscal policy and that what we're going to do, no matter who else is doing stuff differently? We're not followers. We're going to go from first principles, and any kind of intervention that we have is going to be disciplined. It's going to be targeted to people who need. We can subsidize people, we cannot subsidize profits, and so on and so forth. And as a result, thank God, we were able to ensure that we didn't end up with the second and third order effects from what was a massive shock. Remember, tourism is our largest, every sector contributes in different ways. The contribution of tourism is primarily through the foreign exchange that it generates. It is a fact, and I don't want this to be misinterpreted, but I believe in people knowing data. It is a fact that we lost 150,000 jobs, but PAYE hardly budged. That's for another day. Okay? That's for another day. But as a fact, we should all be aware of. Okay? And that tells you something about the structure of our economy that we will have to address at some point. However, the foreign exchange contribution is without question. And we lost $2 billion of foreign exchange inflows overnight. Now, I put it to you that balance of payments is where Jamaica's traditional weakness has been. Everybody focuses on the fiscal, and the fiscal is obvious and clear. But the balance of payment component is the channel through which stuff can happen very quickly. And if we hadn't pivoted towards inflation targeting, increased our foreign reserves by $1 billion between with the pivot that started in early 2019. I'm sorry, the pivot started prior to 2019, about 2018 or thereabouts. We would have been in a difficult position. Clearly, the international community came together. There was an RFI, there was from the fund, there was the distribution of the special drawing rights. But if we never had our own capital excesses in the central bank, we would have been flirting with serious challenge and situation. So I say this to say that putting Jamaica in a position where we are more resilient from economic shock is critically important to be able to continue our development through economic shock and for industries like this to be able to grow and survive. This industry will have no future if Jamaica remains as vulnerable to economic shock as we have been in the past. Now, the role of the government is pursuing a strategy where we see the private sector as having the capacity to mobilize investments on a scale that far exceeds the government's capacity. The government's capital budget is growing quickly. It's about $80 billion a year in central government and probably another $80 billion in the public bodies, so maybe $160 billion a year. But the capacity of the private sector overall far exceeds this investable capacity of the government. And the key is to have an enabling environment where investment is attractive, where there are investment opportunities, where the government doesn't stand in the way of investment, and that there are means by which investment can be mobilized. Because again, it doesn't happen automatically. And we have been focused on pursuing policies that are conducive to that taking place. The mobilization of capital, the identification of investment opportunities, making sure we don't crowd them out, and facilitating this intermediation. As we have continued to reduce, and this concept pay down on debt is not an accurate concept. I mean, what we focus on is the debt ratio. It's not a matter of paying down on debt, as you all know. What happens is that all we're doing is servicing our interest bill from our revenues and not borrowing to pay interest. So when you hear about paying down debt, I mean, it's not how it sounds. That's like playing with words. What we are doing is paying interest from our revenue. The days of paying interest by borrowing more principal, which got us into trouble in the first place, that just makes us more vulnerable. And when it makes us more vulnerable, the people at the bottom are the people who hurt the most. So by reducing our debt ratio, the economy grows in size, we're not borrowing to pay interest, and so the ratio goes down. And the ratio goes down means that the government, as a proportion of the economy, is taking less money out, leaving more money for the private sector. We have tried to stimulate that by removing distortionary taxes, by bringing assets to market, private assets, and by reforming regulations to make the accumulation of capital more seamless. In 2019, we made a reform to the pension investment regulations, allowing for the first time for pension funds and institutional investors to invest in private vehicles that are dedicated towards venture capital and private equity. That has unleashed a wave of innovation and fundraising for these kinds of initiatives. And that's good. It's good because our market economy can only be effective if we have flexible pools of capital in the economy that can take advantage of opportunities. And so since the time that we made those amendments to the regulations, we have had tremendous growth in the assets under management and with the introduction of new firms and new companies that are pursuing such strategies. We've also made other changes on the private side in terms of the issuance of debt, making it clear that if private debt is rated, then pension funds can invest in it. Again, incentivizing the provision of more information to the market. A market functions best with information. If information is absent, then you have anarchy. You have mispricing, you have losses, and then people will shy away and the market remains closed. So if we want markets to function, we have to act in a way that's conducive to more, better, accurate, timely information being available to market participants. But we went further than that. We, in partnership with our multilateral partners, are making allocations ourselves towards this space. In this year's budget, I shared that the government, through the DBJ, is sponsoring the emergence of an SME, a venture capital fund in which the government of Jamaica is investing $750 million, and there was an RFP for a private manager on the condition that the private manager brought our 750 up to $2 billion from private sector investors. And we want to invest on the same level, pari passu, with the private sector. That's a $2 billion fund. In addition to that, I announced that we are sponsoring a SME private equity fund, where the government is providing an additional $750 million in a competitive process on condition that the manager raises additional funds to bring the capitalization to $2 billion. So that's two $2 billion funds sponsored by the government of Jamaica. And under the Serve Jamaica program, which was launched during the pandemic, the government of Jamaica put up $2 billion for two funds on the condition that DBJ runs a process that finds managers who can raise the additional $4 billion. So it's two funds of three each. $1 billion, so let me talk about it in aggregate. Put up $2 billion for a total capitalization of $6 billion. So through the actions of the government of Jamaica, there will be $10 billion of venture capital and private equity funds available in Jamaica that were not available before. That is a government that gets that having pools of capital that can pursue opportunity is conducive to Jamaica's growth and development. But we're not stopping there. Through our Biggie program, we have launched incubator funds. The Biggie program came out in 2019, and we've been rolling it out ever since. We have launched an incubator fund where we have added to the incubator space in Jamaica for small and emerging companies. We have launched an innovation fund that has provided innovation grants to many medium-sized enterprises, some of which are quite well known, have big brands out there, and have received sizable grants from the government of Jamaica. And we have launched an accelerator program that takes in high potential SMEs and provides them with resources and linkages and capital. If anybody wants to know any more about them, please get in contact with the DBJ. But we are promoting, we are backing, we are sponsoring the mobilization of private capital in Jamaica to build a robust medium and small business ecosystem. And of course, large, you know, we know large people like Gazan, he can take care of himself. So the government of Jamaica is supporting a deepening of capital markets and really supporting a Jamaica where capital becomes a commodity. Our aim is to commoditize capital. The thought that, or the Jamaica where if you have a good idea or a good plan, or if you have the energy in your belly and the stomach, or you have the mindset and the nerves to take on the hard path of an entrepreneurial career, then lack of capital should not stop you. The fact that you don't come from a family that has generational money shouldn't stop you. Right? The fact that you don't have an auntie you can call, or uncle you can call, a father, a brother, shouldn't stop you, because a Jamaica where that is the prerequisite for entrepreneurial success is a Jamaica that will turn on itself. That is a Jamaica that can't last. That is a Jamaica where people, the forces of resentment will tear it down. Am I speaking? You understand what I'm saying? So we see it as critically important to sustain in the model that we believe is most effective for Jamaica's long-term growth and development, that capital becomes a commodity. Now, the only way for capital to become a commodity is for this space and spaces like these to grow. There's capital available from banks, from credit unions. Everywhere you look, there's capital. Bank, credit union, microcredit, private equity, venture capital, mezzanine. Come, name some more. You just get this capital everywhere, right? Everywhere you look, and you have access to capital. So you go out there and you compete, and the only thing that makes a difference is your energy, your acumen, your passion, your character, your ability to bounce back from defeat. That is what should matter. And that's the only thing that should separate men and women, not the condition of your birth. And that is the idea behind our pursuits. It's not an idle pursuit. It's not, because flashy and nice boot and tie. No, it's deeply rooted in the conviction that our long-term growth and sustainability is best achieved through a robust private sector. But if that private sector is dependent, or if that private sector is not built on a foundation where capital is commoditized, then it can't last. It's not sustainable. So to make it last and to make it sustainable, we have to commoditize capital. Now let me say this in closing, that the way that we're going to get there is not through flashiness. We have to always make sure that substance triumphs over form. I can't be clearer on this. The growth of these kind of spaces elsewhere didn't happen because, there was some edict, or didn't happen because it was the cool thing to do. It happened because they delivered returns to their investors. That is how they grew. So what I want to see you do is to focus on delivering returns to your investors. Risk-adjusted, real returns consistently over a long period of time. That is how you will grow. Substance, right, over form. And if you do that, you have a government that supports the mobilization of capital. And what we really want to see Because where Jamaica really takes off is that your returns are so good and so consistent that you not only attract domestic capital, but where this thing really takes off and where Jamaica really benefits is when you're so good that you begin to attract foreign capital to Jamaica. And we will do our part. We are going to make investable assets available as far as the government is concerned. The government will be pursuing, and we have the ability to pursue with rehabilitated finances, PPPs as a means of financing our development in the infrastructure space, in the services space. I know the Ministry of Health wants to, and we will work with them to provide health services that are privately financed, where the government, purchases space that can be made available to the public, but it's going to need private financing and innovative investments. And there are a number of other areas where the mobilization of capital will be conducive to the direction of the government. But your responsibility, I want to put it to you, is to ensure that you serve faithfully the people who trust you with their capital, and you deliver for them consistent returns over a long period of time, and your dreams will come through. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.